Mrs. Reed, who acted as the only meeting manager for the entire day, and you did a masterful job. Yay! So we're going to get the long-awaited report on the Citizens Task Force about the budget. So I think I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Garza and let you and your staff take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Velkoff and members of the board. I'm just going to kind of shake things up and sit on this end of the table for a little bit. No, I'm actually conducting this presentation as we started this process many months ago. We, in our plan, indicated that I would present to you what the task force presented to me in terms of their recommendations. So I'm actually going to sit down here and provide a very short presentation with regard to their work. I think it is important for the public and the community and anyone else who might be interested in this topic to know that our board members just received this report today, and we did that on purpose, is because we did not want to get in the media before the board even had a chance to visit and talk about it. So today, there may not be a lot of discussion around the report just because the board members are getting it cold. I'm going to walk board members through it, but I will tell you that it will be a very definite and very important resource to us as we begin the heavy lifting of starting the fiscal year 17 actual budget development moving forward. I do want to start by thanking members of the task force, 36 members strong. Quite a number of them are actually in the room tonight. This is a very impressive group of people. I don't know, in my almost 30 years of education, have I seen a task force meet time and time and time again, and people were there, present, attended the meetings, and there were a lot of them. But behind the scenes also continue to do a lot of homework. So I'm personally very grateful for their time, their energy, and the seriousness for which they approached this very difficult task. Matt Haley serves as our chair, and Matt's here on the front row. And I think Matt, we were laughing last week, I don't know that Matt understood what he was getting into either when he was asked and graciously agreed to serve as the chair, because you can imagine this was a difficult task. We all know, and certainly this board knows, what's ahead and what we've experienced over the previous years, and any contemplation of any kind of change in programs and services, just cuts in our system, they're painful. And so there were many, many emotional conversations. They were very tough to manage and kind of keep the group moving forward. And Matt, you did a great job in leading and shepherding this group, and the amount of time and energy you put into it is just really remarkable. And so if you would bear with me, if you remember the task force, so if you would please stand so that we can acknowledge your great work. And I will tell you that I think in terms of resource to us moving forward, not only will this document be a resource to us, but all of these individuals will likely continue to be a resource to us as well, because it's very rarely that you'll find the opportunity for a layperson to have the opportunity to really dig in deeply into our budget. We have a very complex budget, $2.6 billion budget. And I will tell you, these folks have studied it and understand it, I think, quite well. So I will definitely continue to call upon them as we move this work forward. And as I said earlier, we gave them a very arduous task, and many of them would tell you they didn't want to touch or contemplate any cuts to anything that we were doing in our system, but that wasn't the charge that we were given. And it certainly wasn't the charge that we gave to this task force. We said, if in fact this is the amount of money we're getting from the county, which was the guidance of around 3%, and if in fact these additional factors continue to affect us, that means we're going to have a shortfall of at least around $71 million, if not more. So how would you have us approach, assuming that all of these conditions stay the same, assuming we still just get 3%, and assuming all this moves forward in the same way, how would you have us think about making these very difficult decisions. And so they didn't get a choice of saying, we don't want to do this, we want you to consider revenue options. There are certainly some fees and dues that they had us think about, but some of them were not particularly thrilled about having to even consider any of these reductions. So I believe that the report fairly represents the tasks they were given, and it fairly represents consensus around, should this be this very difficult task, face a school system, you know, where would we have these decisions made? And I will tell you, it does not represent necessarily the viewpoints of any one individual task force member, because I will tell you, if you ask any one of them, they may have strong opinions about one thing or the other that they would have preferred that it not be reflected on the list. So moving forward, I'll explain that in just a little bit more. The guidance that's reflected in this report, when you've had a chance to review it, it's very, very important that the community understand this does not represent a decision in any way, shape, or form. And people will misconstrue it, and people will, take things out of context, I'm afraid, moving forward. But I think it's very important for our board and for our school system and those who are following this process to represent that this is not a decision-making document. This is yet another resource, another tool, another view of what our community would have to say about if we have to make these kinds of cuts, how would we approach it? But does not represent in any decisions in any way, shape, or form. In fact, many of the task force members would tell you they didn't want any cuts to happen in our system whatsoever, and took this task. They found it very, very difficult moving forward. So I have a very short presentation. Certainly there was this significant fiscal challenge that I don't have to tell this school board about. We've been engaged in this for some time, and in fact, we've cut since 2008. On an annual basis, we've had to cut system operations. And had these reductions not have been made, today, FCPS's budget would be nearly $500 million higher, and there would be an additional 2,175 positions throughout our system doing the work of serving children. A lot of those positions would be in classrooms, where we've talked about class size earlier tonight. We've raised class size 3 times to balance the budget, resulting in this, and certainly our central office has been cut dramatically over time. We have attempted, to the very extent possible, over these annual cuts to protect our classrooms and our schools to the extent we possibly could. And I will tell you, we've been very overt about that over these last few years particularly, but I know it's been happening in the school system for a long time. And so we knew when we got down to fiscal year 17, because of the annual exercise of cutting costs to the system, we would have no choice but to consider potentially cuts to programs and services to our schools as we entertain the possibility of having yet to make additional cuts to our system. And so because we were potentially going to have to make decisions that would affect programs and services, we felt it was important for our community to have a say. Now, ultimately, that decision rests with the school board, and certainly in working with me as I move a budget forward to you, and then ultimately to our funders, which are our County Board of Supervisors and the delegation, our General Assembly in Richmond. We felt it is important for us to have as many opportunities for our community to weigh in as possible, and I'm proud of that this year. We've used our budget tool, and we've had thousands of people who've participated in the budget tool. You heard a report on that last month about how many have engaged thus far using that tool and how many found it easy to use. And I think beyond that, it's also been an instructive exercise to go through that process, because it's very easy for people to have opinions about, well, cut this or cut that, but until you have the full magnitude of how difficult it is to get to 50 million, even 50 million in cuts, I think that the tool has been beneficial. The budget task force was established yet as yet another way for us to have the viewpoint of our public. So we did ask board members to name individuals to serve. We asked many of our employee organizations, the chamber, many other organizations, PTAs, et cetera, to participate in this process. So we began meeting with them this past summer. And I did ask for them to develop 2 scenarios. It started off to be 3 as we started to see the numbers moving forward, just like any budget year. We said we felt like a $50 million and a $75 million scenario would be what we would need. And that's in light of the fact that there are lots and lots of unknowns throughout this process. So we recognize that moving forward by having 2 different scenarios. So as we know more about the state funding, we know more about some of the cost drivers on our system over the coming months, we'd be ready to respond with one of the scenarios. And certainly, as I mentioned before, Matt Haley chaired that group for us. We spent a lot of time in our initial meetings kind of just understanding the budget itself, how potential program reductions would affect various stakeholders, our parents, our students, et cetera. And like I said, they today I think have more in-depth understanding of our budget than many. They've studied our overall budget. They spent also quite a bit of time reviewing cuts that have been made in previous years, going back since 2008. And I will tell you that I was very pleased and proud with how as we attended the meetings, we let them do their work. We tried very hard not to shape the work, but to be a resource to them. And I will tell you, I was quite pleased with the way in which they talked often about how would this decision affect students, which I thought was always great. How would this affect different kinds of students, our neediest students, our ESOL students? How does this affect our employees? That was talked about all the time. How would this affect our teachers and our employees throughout the system? And they would often go back to where have we made cuts over time, and and that had a bearing also, I think, on some of their recommendations moving forward. The group looked at, we provided them feedback that we received from the community via user voice. There were numerous community meetings, and I know some of those will continue as we continue the budget process. There was lots of active work, as I pointed out earlier, by each and every budget task force meetings member, and there certainly the budget proposal tool. We provided them a synopsis of all the feedback that we had gotten from the community at that time. I asked early on in the process, certainly this list of criteria that I asked for them to consider could have been much longer than it was, but I did ask for them to consider, as they made suggestions, the number of students impacted in our system, how the decision might affect our employees and our students, particularly as we looked at compensation, some of those decisions and where we tracked there. Just disruption to the system, just kind of be thoughtful of if this happens, how might it affect, FCPS as a whole. I also asked for them to consider permanent cuts instead of one-time cuts. We know that fiscal year 17, we've been doing this since fiscal year, 9? Fiscal year 17 is going to be difficult, but we know we're not out of the woods, that there's more of this ahead, unfortunately. And so we need a long-term budget solution, but it doesn't help us to just cut something that's only a one-year cut that moves forward into the next fiscal year as yet another cost driver. So also ask for them to consider the magnitude of the cut. We can cut a lot of things, but the fewer zeros associated with that, it's very hard to have it equal $50 million or $75 million. So certainly we strive to make sure that we're taking advantage of every opportunity to be efficient, whether that's a $10,000 savings or a $50,000 savings. But in terms of this exercise, that was not going to move the needle. And so we really tried to look at things that would actually, kind of move the needle. And finally, and most importantly, how it would affect student outcomes. especially in terms of our core instruction moving forward. This next page, page 7, slide 7, comes directly from the report, from the statements provided from the task force. So these are not my words, these are their words, and when you have a chance to read the full report, you'll see that this is something that's in there. But they stated cuts identified will negatively impact every student, teacher, parent, administrator, and staff member in the Fairfax County Public Schools. The operating budget was reviewed in depth, and very few programs and services are left without cuts. And so you'll start to see that they allude to some of the things that were included within the report. When you've had a chance to review more in depth, their $50 million scenario and the $75 million scenario, you'll see that the report reflects degree of consensus, which is important, and I'm going to move to the next one. And this next page, I think, illustrates very well how difficult it was to achieve consensus on any one item. So I think it reflects how difficult these decisions are and how mindful we all are, certainly task force members are, at how this might affect and really change FCPS into the future. So you'll see in the first column, in the $50 million scenario, $14.9 million we were able to achieve or reflect in the first, or they were able to reflect in the $50 million scenario, had at least 75% agreement. But you see they had to go to 42% agreement in order to get to $50 million in cuts. So you see how you had to continue. There were some that had higher degrees of agreement, but you'll see as you get further down in the scenario, there are very definitely items that have low degree of consensus from the group. And then if you move to the $75 million scenario, you'll see there that that was even more difficult to achieve a strong consensus because some of these items are just very painful to consider. There were individuals that didn't participate in the voting, and there were numerous times where voting occurred. And even on one particular, we didn't require that everyone voted all the time, so that was something very important to note. But everyone participated in the discussion, which was, like I said, very in-depth and lively discussion moving forward. And then the final thing I would say, again, just to reiterate, I'm not going to go through each of the scenarios tonight because the board hasn't had a chance to even look at them. But I know that we all will consider them as we move forward and we have to make the difficult decisions that we have to make. But guidance, I want to reiterate that the guidance from the Budget Task Force does not represent any final decisions. So anyone that reads a report that says, well, they're going to cut this or they're going to cut that, that may or may not be the case at all. This is what the task force as a whole, not individual task force members, but as a whole, where the greatest consensus or agreement exists, but it doesn't constitute any final decisions. And again, as I pointed out, it will serve as a resource certainly to me as I'm developing the budget that I'll present on January the 7th. And moving forward, there'll be many opportunities in that next line. I was going to say there are many opportunities for the public to continue to weigh in on our website. You can continue to have your voice be heard there. But after January the 7th, our board, and it's on our budget timeline, there will be at least 2 budget hearings. There will be numerous board meetings where the community can weigh in. So this doesn't complete the process. This just, to some extent, it starts in earnest now that we have some great feedback from our community. And then finally, again, I would just say I am so grateful and thankful for the work of our budget task force. It's my hope that, sincere hope, that as people look at this report, that they respect the work that's been done by each and every one of our task force members, because I can tell you I watched and I observed the dedication, the commitment to FCPS and to this entire community. They each, to a person, care about our schools and care about the future of our school system. And so while this was a difficult and arduous task that we asked them to complete, my respect to each and every one of them. So that will conclude my presentation at this point, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I know moving forward, the board will have a chance to study the report and read it in its entirety. There are a couple of additional things that I know the task force wants to continue to do. They have some addenda that they want to complete with regard to state and local recommendations with regard to funding, some local things that they'd like for us to consider that are more long-term strategies that could not be completed in this budget cycle. And so they're going to continue to work on that and get that to us at a later date. Yes.
Okay,
Thank
so I want to pick up on thank you to each and every member of the Budget Task Force. And one more time, but now individually, could I please ask the folks who are on the task force individually, please just stand up, say your name, please. All right, I think that's it. Thank you.
And Mr. Velkoff, I was
ma'am.
remiss. I should have said something about our staff. And I was getting the signal from some of the team. You know, our financial services team are lean and mean, and we had Tina also that facilitated for us. But you know, I was very proud of our team and how they responded to the questions that were presented, because they were given lots and lots and hundreds, I don't even know how many, but lots and lots of questions and analysis and materials that they put together to help support the budget task force. And I want you to know they put in extraordinary amount of time, energy. And I think if you ask any member of the task force, they would say that our team did a great job.
No poaching, Mrs. Smith. Okay, so right now I have Mr. Moon and Mr. Press. Mr. Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Barco. Thanks for the presentation. Of course, I want to thank again the members on the task force who have put in, I don't know how many hours, including, I want to thank my own appointee, Mr. George Becerra, even though we have not really had, conversation, because I am one of those board members who do not want to put in undue influence on an appointee's work. But thank you. Thank you for serving on the task force and putting in your efforts into this. I just want to hear again from a superintendent about your expectation of us, about use of this report between now and until you present your proposal in January, and of course after you present your report, your proposed budget to us. Especially if you could focus on what do you expect us to do with this.
The way I think it's an excellent question, Mr. Moon. Certainly, as I'm working right now through development of the budget for January the 7th, and as I visit with individual board members about your hopes for what that might look like, because I think we serve the division the very best if that January 7th budget is as reflective of the desire of this board as possible. I would certainly start to study and look at those items that had the highest degree of agreement, and certainly those that had the lowest degree of agreement, because I think it does give us yet one more indication of what what our community would have us think about as we have to make some of these tough decisions. That's the way I'm looking at it.
So are you expecting to have any further discussion before the January on this one, or this is the last time we'll be dealing with this?
We will continue to have budget development discussions over the coming months. So we will have work sessions where I will potentially reference some of the guidance from the task force. And certainly, I'd welcome you doing the same if that's helpful to you as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Press.
Thank you, Mr. Velkoff. So Dr. Garza a little bit earlier mentioned some heavy lifting. This binder has become heavy lifting. I'm glad I don't have to carry it around anymore. But in all seriousness, this final report that board members are going to have the opportunity to read represents the product of over 1,000 volunteer hours plus countless hours of staff time. So it really is a comprehensive report that, and I want to put out there for the record that as a member of this task force, I can say that I don't think there's a member of this group that likes the fact that this document has certain cuts in it. I don't like that there have to be any cuts in this document, but the group really came together well, and I'm really proud to have been a part of that process. And I can say that without a doubt, when I get out into the schools, that I get to represent and interact with students, they have by far and away felt more involved in this budget process than they have ever before. And that message really resounds in the community. I've been able to attend some budget town halls and whatnot, and the ability for the community to be engaged and involved in this process through the user voice and the budget tool was something I think that is a great example for us to take into the future as we make these high-level policy decisions, and especially in something that's as important as a budget, where it really needs to reflect a community's values in education. This was a great framework for us to have to do that, to make that decision. So, board members, I would recommend that you give your task force members a pat on the back and a big heartfelt thank you, because they did an incredible amount of work. I mean, we had 10+ meetings, community engagement, digital time. I mean, this was something that was going on, constantly from June until this past week. So, really, really proud to have been a part of this, and thank you, Dr. Garza, for allowing the student voice to be heard on this committee. And once again, thank you to all the committee members.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Moon asked a good question, sort of like, how are we going to use this resource, right? Because that's really what it is. And as I'm looking at it, one of the things that I see right away is that the task force has had the opportunity to ask a lot of questions that staff has already answered. So the board every year asks budget questions and we get them answered, but here we already have many. So what I'm going to do first is just, go through all the background material here and, see if there's anything that I might be wondering about and ask that. And we can keep it handy. I think it's just a great resource for our decision making.
And I will say to that point, as we've contemplated how we could support our new board members that are coming on, we actually said, you know what, that's a great primer about our budget. The entire binder, I didn't bring mine down with me, but we have an entire binder of information that was given to the task force members. Yeah, and so I think, you're right. I think that's a great resource moving forward.
And I suppose if a board member would like to have one of those binders, is that possible? I mean, it's all electronically available as well, right? I don't know if we do. We get a, right? We get a budget binder every year anyway, right? And so
Yes, and for anyone in the audience or in the public that's listening, every document that we provided to the task force, we posted. So if you're ever interested, I go to it actually quite frequently because it is a great place to find answers to some of the burning questions about the budget. So all those documents that we gave, that whole binder is on our website.
Great. I just had a few more specific questions. So on slide 6, when we look at the criteria suggested, I'm looking at the bottom bullet there where it says student outcomes, especially on core instruction, because I think that's one of the challenges that we have when we're trying to decide what to cut. Student outcomes are difficult to measure. They're long-term. They're a little bit squishy, right? And we can't necessarily say if we pull out $3 million in this program, it's going to have a certain impact on student outcomes. So how did you look at that?
I had one task force member that was dismayed because we didn't have program evaluations on everything. Well, you can imagine if we said we have to have a program evaluation on everything before we could consider a cut, it would take us years to get through the process. And in addition to that, it's always difficult to draw causal connections in education, right? If we do this, then this happens. So we had to approach this with the assumption that every aspect of our organization was meeting its intended purpose. Okay, we had to start with that assumption, or else we get caught up in because someone may have an opinion about this program doesn't meet this need, or this one meets this need. So we had to approach the work with the assumption that it's meeting its intended purpose. So when I was speaking of outcomes, like for an example, if we were to cut support for ESOL programming, could that negatively affect outcomes for that student group? So that's the way we asked them to approach it. Or if we had to, raise class size, how might that affect outcomes? So, that there wasn't a way to quantify those, but so that's why the conversations at the task force level were very important around if we do this, what could the potential outcomes be?
No, and I know that's tricky. And I think one of the things that we're doing as a system that I like over the last couple of years is that we're doing more program evaluations. So we will have more and more of those on the shelf as we go forward and making these tough decisions. So thank you. Slide 7. I just want to. This slide illustrates for me how very, very, very difficult this is, because when I see the words class sizes, I immediately think, when I went to the budget tool, I didn't touch class size at all after what we've been through for the last 7 years, and particularly the last few years. So, I think this probably illustrates how tough it is going to be for us to take all of these recommendations. So we're not going to. We're going, these are not decisions, right? But this is just background information for us, and some sense of what this group of citizens who really, combed through the budget was able to come up with, and all of it painful. I think it's fair to say. Just a couple other things. So the task force members, I do feel like we have a tremendous resource there, just in the people, as you were saying. And it sounds like they will stay together at least long enough to produce these addenda on funding, and they will continue to get staff support for that. And will we get some sort of report on those?
Yes, they're working on that, and as soon as their final report's ready, I'll bring it back to that, subsequent work session whenever we have that. I think we're hoping a December work session that we'll have that, but we'll see how Matt's smiling. So as soon as they, as soon as I get it, yes, I'll bring it to you as soon as it's completed.
I guess
And at some point in the future, I think there's some ways that we can continue to utilize that group.
Well, I hope so, because one of the things that I hear from folks in the group is that they really, really wanted to be able to talk about the revenue side. They want to be part of the next conversation, which is, all right, well, if this is where we are and we don't want to make these cuts, how do we help advocate for the revenue that we need? And they have the knowledge and passion to help us do that. So I'm not sure. I mean, I've already used Sridhar, my representative, in talking to people in the community, and thank you, Krista Michael, we had a budget town hall the other night at Madison High School, and Sridhar was there. And when people see the facts speak for themselves on this. And so their first question at the end of the presentation is, okay, how do we help? Who do we talk to? How do we convince our funders to reinvest in the school system? And I think that the task force members see that more clearly maybe than even anybody else. So just one more thing. I feel like in a lot of ways this is the first time on my time on the board that we have really engaged the community early enough and in a meaningful enough way in this budget conversation. So I know that a lot of or some at least of the supervisors have their own citizen budget committees, but of course they also have an office full of staff to help them do that sort of thing. So I don't know if there's some way I would like us to think about envisioning this as not exactly what we just did, because I know that was enormous, but something that maybe some way the school board could reach out for community input on the budget early, and this is sort of a model. But thank you very much, everyone, for your work.
Ms. Evans.
Well, I too want to thank everybody who's on the Budget Committee, and in particular, my task force member, Sarah Mattingly. Thank you for being here today as well. And I hope we acknowledged earlier that Ben Press was also our student on there. So thank you, Ben, for your work on that too, with everything else that you have to do. I think that one of the things this has shown, not that we needed this a lot, those of us who have followed the budget for years now, but just how difficult this was to do. How some of these items were very small items that they had to piece together a lot of things in order to get to the 50%, even to the 50%, much less the 75%. I think some of the things that the task force didn't put on their list are nonetheless things that we should be looking at for the longer term. I don't think that they just drop out of the equation. I'm thinking about the trimester system. I don't think that we've really, that's an area where it was new to me. I don't know if it was new to all members of this board, but that might be something for us to look. It's not something we're going to do for next year, but it might be something for the longer term that we would want to look at. So I think some of these ideas we save for the future, and see if some of these things have merit for the longer term.
On that point, that's exactly what the conversations were with the task force. That's why they did not make any changes or suggestions to the high school master schedules, because that'd be very difficult to accomplish given that our high schools are already developing their master schedules for next year.
Right.
So they recognize that some of these ideas, some of these things could happen in the future, but could not happen in this in fiscal year 17.
So I hope we have sort of a parking lot someplace for some of these longer term and bigger ideas. And my one comment, I know how difficult this was, and we will all have our frame of reference by which we're looking at each of the individual items. I would caution about the level at which the numbers required looking at needs-based staffing. There are a number of items on here. In fact, in the $50 million scenario, the largest number is the 5.2 for needs-based staffing. And if you add all of the needs-based together and raising the number of the minimum from 17 to 19, that's $11 million out of the 50. And I just will tell my colleagues that gives me heartache to think about that much of this coming from the neediest kids in the neediest schools.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. I mean, I understand that position. I don't know that we'll go through tonight necessarily debating each of these items point by point. I think it's very clear that that we would not necessarily have agreement within the individual board member. I think that one's one. Ms. Hines, you mentioned class size. There could be a number of others that individual board members, take objection to, and certainly I understand that. And that's why I want this to be understood that this does not reflect any decisions, but certainly is a recommendation that I know we'll all take seriously moving forward.
Ms. McLaughlin.
I'm sure I share the sentiments of all the board members that we're deeply appreciative of the amount of time the community and staff have put into this, and the way it demonstrates the school system's commitment to really help gauge where the public is on the things that are most important and the things that when faced with some difficult decisions, what does the barometer tell us? So I think that Dr. Garza, you're to be applauded for your desire to say, I know what my leadership team and I could try and pull together, but can we be sure that this is really an accurate read on where Fairfax County residents are? So I think that for a first-time effort of something of this magnitude, I think this is to be deeply applauded. But as I shared with you in one of our budget conversations, I do think as a first year into this, there's going to be a lot of things we'll have to be very careful in using this guidance. And so a few questions I have, first of all, is when I look at the chart itself, I'm trying to think which page I can point to. It's toward the end of the report where you have the breakouts of budget proposal tool responses, and it'll say percent all and then percent community. So maybe one page I can point to is page 24. It's just looking at that column. And so it'll say percent all, percent community, percent employee, percent parent, percent student. And one thing I didn't see in the report is what those actual numbers are to date. Is there a page on here that says, you know, what those numbers are? As when? Okay. So
we're still collecting
right,
from the
but,
budget tool.
but the numbers, I mean, percentage doesn't tell me the actual number of respondents.
At that time, 10-7, I think we provided that last time. What was it?
Carol had it.
As of that time, date.
As of the date, the total number was 3,056 people. Of those, 1,722 were parents, 499 employees.
Wait, hold on. You're going way too fast.
Okay.
Okay, 1,000.
722 parents, 499 were employees,
Okay.
450 reported being community members,
Okay.
and then we had 355 students.
Okay. So thank you. The board members, the reason I was asking those numbers is we have to, as a first blush, be very careful about the actual representation of a county of 1.1 million people. And when you look at the fact that we've got almost 190,000 students, 350 of them weighed in and said this. We have over 24,000 full-time employees, 500 gave us some input. But one thing that I was sort of surprised Ms. Evans didn't bring up, and maybe she was just didn't feel she could with her history, but I was concerned about the responses that came in on, you know, let's just get rid of later start times. I mean, it said, according to the numbers, 60% of employees said eliminate it. And that would be...
You notice that was not in the budget task force recommendations.
Oh, absolutely. And that was very encouraging to me. But I guess what I'm saying is if I were to read that in a vacuum, I might think, oh my goodness, 60% of our county employees don't see the value of why the board has felt so strongly, why you as a superintendent felt so strongly. But when you think about that's 500 people who weighed in out of 24,000 employees, it could be that the other 23,000, 500 are saying, nope, we understand the value there. And so that's just where we're going to have to, again, I think what you talked about, where's the percent of agreement versus disagreement? Where is it lopsided? Why might it be lopsided? And in this case with start times, it could just be a matter of the task force as they had appreciation and understanding of why this school system has been so committed to it. That was why their level of agreement was so high to protect it and say, no, we don't want to put it on the chopping block.
It didn't really even get real serious, I think, consideration on the task force because that hit one of the criteria, how disruptive it would be for the system. Mm-hmm. If I recall some of the conversation, I think Matt's shaking his head over there. I think, as was pointed out earlier, we approach all of this with different lenses. And I've even told the task force, I may even bring a different lens to this work than the task force or any individual member does. I think moving forward, we have to make the best decisions for the school system. And I think the lens that the board members bring to the work certainly may be different. But I think it's helpful and instructive for us to know what our community is thinking and their perceptions and perspectives moving forward. I think this also it's difficult, and something I've been challenged with is how do we get more people interested and engaged? So I think the numbers not only I think are reflective of kind of one lens, but I think it's kind of sad, not more, despite numerous attempts to get it out there and kit messages that it's out there and all kinds of community members meetings about that tool being available. And I think using some online tools, we've probably gotten more people to weigh in than we would in the past. But I still think it's certainly a challenge for us. One of our greatest challenges is how to get more people engaged.
The other question that I know you'd received an email from a parent that lives in my district and was asking the question of, in terms of those who completed the survey tool, was there a way to somehow vet that they actually are live in Fairfax County, or did they hear about it through a family member and they actually live in Arizona, and also, could someone respond multiple times without it being necessarily picked up that the same person just weighed in, 4 or 5 times?
We do ask for zip code. Of course, people can tell stories about that. So they could only submit one time on one computer. So they had to go to varied computers if they wanted to submit. Isn't that right? Multiple times?
We couldn't block multiple submissions coming from the same IP address because we wanted to make sure we weren't blocking people that happen to work for the same employer or the same system. And we also had to have it open to people who didn't reside in Fairfax County because of all the students at TJ, as well as our employees, many of whom don't live in the county.
And for me, that was just a matter of, as the questions were raised by the public, I think it's helpful for us as a board and a superintendent to just be able to say, we do realize, in trying to be open and inclusive, there's going to be an opportunity for people outside the system to respond. But I think it again goes to, what do the larger macro level themes come through with this? And also, I do think that as we get closer to the budget being a reality, I think this is phase 1, and I think phase 2 will be when you present us your proposed budget. Phase 3 is going to be when the supervisors start making some decisions about the transfer amount, and phase 4 is going to be, where are we based on the overall transfer amount we finally received, and how do we finally reconcile the numbers? Not to monopolize the time, I do want to just share one other thing with my colleagues that I did say to Dr. Garza in my budget one-on-one that in terms of where we are looking at January, and as she tries to prepare something for us in light of the minimal transfer amount that's been received by county guidance, I hope in the end of November we will get county guidance that they actually recognize that 3% is absolutely unthinkable, untenable, not even worth anyone's efforts to keep trying to shoot for 3%. And for the first time in the 4 years I've served on the school board, I am strongly encouraging the superintendent to present a budget that, in my mind, doesn't increase programs, but it will absolutely include matching raises for our employees based on what the county is projecting for theirs, and covering the other uncontrolled costs like the healthcare. And if that brings us to a 6 or 7% over last year's budget, then you will hear me for the first time say that's the needs-based budget, and that's what it needs to be. And then the county board of supervisors and the school board have the dual responsibility of working together to look at county revenue and figure out what the solutions are. And I want the public to know that I believe this board of 12 is absolutely committed to rolling up our sleeves. And I look forward to some of our new supervisors joining the board of supervisors to help us in saying, okay, then now we're going to look at working together on this budget, because our task force volunteers worked extremely hard, but they worked on something that, honestly, if the 22 of us between the supervisor and the school board have been able to get at this almost a year ago, we might have made their work a lot lighter.
And to that point, I do think I agree with everything you said. I do think it's instructive for our community to see what if we only get 3%, what it could look like. And so I think the task force did that work of showing how painful and how difficult and how this could change the face of FCPS, into the future if we only get the 3%.
I must confess, once in a while I come across someone I think you need to get a life, but if you're phoning it in from Phoenix, you need to get an existence. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak here? Wow.
Then the final word is thank you all so much, and the task force members, and we'll continue to use your fine work as we shape this budget moving forward, and just ask as the community to get engaged, get involved, communicate with your supervisors, let them know about the needs of our schools. Thank you.
Mr. Velkoff, are we adjourned?
Madam Chair, we are adjourned.
Thank you.